I gave him 15 years of my life, but he gave his heart and my money to a secret family. Standing in the rain, I watched my husband kiss another woman and call a strange child his princess. He thinks I'm a weak woman with nowhere to go. He has no idea I just made a deal with the one man he fears most. If you want to see how a betrayed wife becomes a mafia queen, subscribe, like, share, and comment justice below, and turn on all notifications. For over a decade, Soo-Jin was the silent power behind her husband Park Dong-Hyun. She gave him her loyalty, her brilliance, and her fortune, believing they were building a legacy together. But a single birthday party she wasn't invited to changes everything. In the shadows of a suburban home, her perfect world is set ablaze. The husband, who claimed he was in a late-night board meeting, is tucking in a 10-year-old child. The man she trusted with her life is kissing another woman with a ring that looks just like hers. And the most painful realization of all, he's been using Soo-Jin's own money to bankroll his betrayal. Mocked and threatened with ruin by the man she once loved, Soo-Jin finds herself standing at a crossroads. Dong-Hyun thinks she's a broken woman with nowhere to go. But he made one fatal mistake. He didn't realize that when a queen is pushed to the edge, she doesn't just jump. She recruits an army. And the man she just met is far more dangerous than anything Dong-Hyun can imagine. The silver rain lashed against the windshield of Soo-Jin's car, a cold rhythm that matched the growing chill in her chest. For 15 years, she had been the architect of Park Dong-Hyun's success, the steady hand that smoothed his path to power. She believed in their partnership, in the sacred quiet of their home. But tonight, the emergency board meeting he claimed to be attending was located in a quiet, tree-lined suburb 40 miles from his office. She watched from across the street, her breath fogging the glass. A modest house was bathed in a warm, golden glow that felt like a mockery of her own cold reality. The front door swung open, and the sight that greeted her felt like a physical blow to the stomach. There was Dong-Hyun. He wasn't wearing the sharp, intimidating suit of a high-level executive. He was in a soft, domestic sweater she had never seen before. He was laughing, a sound of genuine, unburdened joy he hadn't shared with Soo-Jin in years. He wasn't alone. A woman with a gentle, triumphant smile emerged from the kitchen, carrying a birthday cake illuminated by 10 flickering candles. Then came the child, a young girl, roughly 10 years old, with Dong-Hyun's unmistakable eyes and his playful tilt of the head, dashed toward him. "Daddy, you made it!" she squealed, her voice piercing the silence of the rainy street. Soo-Jin felt the air leave her lungs. 10 years. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a fleeting affair. It was an entire parallel life, meticulously maintained while she was bankrolling his lifestyle and protecting his reputation. She watched through the window as he picked the girl up, spinning her around with a tenderness that felt like a knife twisting in Soo-Jin's heart. He kissed the woman, Serena, with a familiar, casual intimacy that suggested they had shared thousands of such nights. Every sacrifice Soo-Jin had made, the long hours, the legal fires she'd extinguished for him, the personal dreams she'd deferred, felt like ash in her mouth. She looked down at her wedding ring, the diamond catching the dim streetlights. It was a symbol of a union that didn't exist. She wasn't his partner. She was his silent investor, unknowingly funding the happy family he hid in the shadows. The birthday candles were blown out, and for a second, the house went dark. In that darkness, the blind loyalty that had defined Soo-Jin for over a decade finally snapped. She didn't cry. Instead, a terrifying, icy clarity took hold. She put the car in gear, the engine purring like a predator in the night. Dong-Hyun thought he was playing a game of secrets, but he had forgotten one thing. Soo-Jin was the one who taught him how to win, and she was about to make sure he lost everything. The rain hadn't stopped by the time Soo-Jin reached their penthouse, the droplets clinging to her expensive silk coat like cold, judgmental fingers. Inside, the air smelled of sandalwood and lies. Dong-Hyun was sitting in his favorite leather armchair, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand, looking every bit the prestigious businessman she had helped him become. "You're late," he said, not even looking up from his tablet. "The charity gala committee called. They're waiting on your final approval for the seating charts." Soo-Jin didn't move. She stood in the center of the living room, her shadow stretching long across the marble floor. I saw you, Dong-Hyun, in the suburbs, at the house with the blue shutters. The room went deathly silent. Dong-Hyun's hand froze midair. Slowly, he set his glass down on the mahogany side table and leaned back, exhaling a long, weary sigh. He didn't look guilty, he looked bored. "So, you finally found out," he said, his voice devoid of any apology. "I figured you'd eventually catch on, though I expected it to take a woman of your supposed intelligence a bit less than 10 years. The cruelty of his tone hit her harder than the discovery itself. 10 years? Soo-Jin whispered, her voice trembling. You've had a daughter for 10 years while we were trying for one? While I was building your reputation, you were using my family's connections to fund a secret life? Dong-Hyun stood up, smoothing the front of his designer suit. He walked toward her, stopping just inches away. He didn't see a partner. He saw a tool that had outlived its usefulness. Let's be realistic, Soo-Jin, he chuckled, a low, mocking sound. Look at yourself. You're 35. You're cold. You're obsessed with business. And quite frankly, you've become boring. Serena gives me a home. She gives me warmth. She gives me a family that doesn't feel like a corporate merger. I am your wife, she hissed, her eyes burning with unshed tears of rage. You're a social asset, he corrected sharply. And where exactly do you think you'll go? You've spent 15 years tied to my name. Without me, you're just a bitter, aging divorcee. You won't leave, Soo-Jin. You're too afraid of the scandal, and you're too old to start over. Sit down, dry your eyes, and keep playing the role of the perfect wife. It's the only thing you're still good at. He patted her cheek condescendingly and walked toward the bedroom, leaving her standing in the cold silence of a home that had never truly been hers. Soo-Jin gripped the fabric of her dress until her knuckles turned white. He thought she was trapped by her own loyalty. He thought she was a bird in a gilded cage. He had no idea that he had just unlocked the door, and the man waiting for her on the other side didn't care about seating charts. He cared about blood. The air in the penthouse was thick with a silence that felt like a physical weight. But Soo-Jin didn't flinch. She sat across from Dong-Hyun, her posture perfect, watching the man she had loved for 15 years transform into a cornered predator. He wasn't pleading anymore. The mask of the devoted husband had been discarded, revealing a face twisted by cold, calculated malice. You think you're so clever, Soo-Jin, he sneered, tossing a stack of documents onto the marble table. You think you can just walk away with half of everything I've built? You're forgetting whose name is on the primary corporate filings. Soo-Jin glanced at the papers. They were freezing orders for her personal and business accounts. You're locking me out of my own inheritance, Dong-Hyun? The capital I provided to start your first firm? I'm protecting my assets from a wife who has clearly lost her mind, he countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low vibrato. By tomorrow morning, every card in your wallet will be a piece of useless plastic. You'll be penniless, living off the charity of friends who only tolerate you because of my status. He leaned in closer, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying confidence. But that's not the end of it. If you mention Serena or the child to anyone, if you so much as whisper a word to the board, I have a file ready for the authorities. It contains a very convincing trail of embezzlement and tax evasion with your digital signature all over it. I've spent months preparing this just in case you ever decided to be difficult. The betrayal cut deeper than the secret family ever could. He hadn't just cheated, he had planned her destruction long before she even knew there was a war to fight. He was threatening to put her in a cage to keep his double life a secret. You would send the woman who built you to prison? She asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the drumming of her heart. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family, he said, the irony of the statement hanging like a ghost between them. So take the small allowance I'll give you, stay in the guest house, and keep your mouth shut. You're a smart woman, Soo-Jin. Don't force me to ruin you. He stood up, adjusted his silk tie, and walked toward the door without looking back. You have until sunrise to decide if you want to be a quiet socialite or a disgraced convict. As the front door clicked shut, Soo-Jin didn't cry. She looked at her trembling hands and gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. He thought he had trapped her in a corner, but he had actually done her a favor. He had finally shown her that there was no sanctity left to save. If Dong-Hyun wanted to play by the rules of the underworld to keep his secrets, she would find someone who ruled that world. He wanted a war? She was done fighting fair. The rain didn't just fall, it punished. Soo-Jin's lungs burned as she sprinted through the labyrinthine alleys of the shipping district, her heels long ago discarded. Behind her, the rhythmic, heavy thud of boots on wet pavement told her that Dong-Hyun's men were closing in. He wasn't just trying to silence her anymore, he was trying to erase her. She rounded a sharp corner, her vision blurred by the downpour, and slammed into a wall of solid black fabric. Strong, cold hands caught her shoulders, steadying her with a grip that felt like iron. "You're trespassing," a voice rasped. It wasn't the voice of a thug. It was deep, cultured, and carried the terrifying weight of absolute authority. Soo-Jin looked up. The man standing before her was Kang Jae-Min. Even in the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, his presence was suffocating. He stood surrounded by men who made Dong-Hyun's hired muscle look like children. This was the heart of the Dragon District, territory even the police avoided. The footsteps behind her skidded to a halt. Dong-Hyun's lead henchman, a man known for his brutality, paled. "Mr. Kang, we didn't know this was your business. We just need the woman. She's domestic trouble." Jae-Min didn't even look at the man. His dark, impenetrable gaze remained fixed on Soo-Jin. He tightened his grip on her shoulders, his eyes searching hers for the inevitable flicker of fear. But Soo-Jin didn't blink. She straightened her back, her light fur coat soaked and heavy, her expression shifting from panic to a sharp, desperate clarity. "I am not domestic trouble," she said, her voice cutting through the rain with icy precision. "I am the majority shareholder of the Song Corporation's logistics wing, and right now, I am the only person who can tell you exactly which offshore accounts Park Dong-Hyun has been using to skim from your port shipments for the last 3 years. The air went still. Jae-Min's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. He tilted his head, intrigued by the woman who was using her final breath, not to beg, but to negotiate. "You're offering me my own money as a ransom for your life?" Jae-Min asked, a ghost of a dangerous smile touching his lips. "I'm offering you the evidence to dismantle his entire operation tonight," Soo-Jin countered. "Save me, and I'll give you the head of the man who's been robbing you. Let them take me, and you'll never see a dime of that stolen capital again." Jae-Min looked past her to the thugs who were now trembling. He looked back at Soo-Jin, seeing not a victim, but a weapon. He let go of her shoulders and reached into his coat, producing a clean, dry handkerchief. "Clean your face, Mrs. Park," he commanded softly. "It's time we discuss the price of your husband's betrayal." The dim, amber light of the private lounge caught the sharp edges of Kang Jae-Min's glass as he swirled his drink, his eyes never leaving Soo-Jin. Most people who found themselves in the crosshairs of a man like him spent their final moments begging or bargaining with ghosts. But Soo-Jin sat across from him with a spine of steel, her breathing steady even as the rain continued to lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows. She wasn't just surviving the night, she was calculating her next move. Jae-Min leaned forward, the shadow of his tailored suit blending into the darkness of the room. "You don't look like a woman who just lost everything," he observed, his voice a low, rhythmic growl. "You look like someone who's been waiting for an excuse to burn the world down." Soo-Jin didn't flinch. "I didn't lose everything. I simply realized I was investing in a sinking ship. Now, I'm looking for a harbor that actually knows how to protect its assets." A slow, dangerous smirk tugged at the corner of Jae-Min's mouth. He found her resolve intoxicating, a cold, refined fury that matched his own. He signaled to one of his men, who stepped forward and dropped a thick leather folder onto the mahogany table. Jae-Min flipped it open, revealing surveillance photos and bank ledgers. "It's a small world, Soo-Jin," he said, tapping a finger on a photograph of Park Dong-Hyun. "Your husband isn't just a liar in his personal life. He's been playing a very dangerous game with my money. He's a low-level associate in a logistics firm I happen to own, and for the last 3 years, he's been skimming off the top of my shipping routes to pay for that suburban paradise he built for his mistress." The air in the room grew heavy as the weight of the revelation settled. Soo-Jin looked at the ledgers, her eyes narrowing as she recognized the shell companies Dong-Hyun had used. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been incredibly stupid. He was stealing from a wolf to feed a stray. He thinks he's untouchable because he uses your family name as a shield, Jae-Min continued, his gaze intensifying. He's been bold because he assumes you'll always be there to clean up his messes and provide the cover of legitimacy. He doesn't realize he's already dead. He's just waiting for me to decide on the date. Soo-Jin reached out, her fingers grazing the edge of the file. The blind loyalty that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. She looked up at the Mafia Boss, her expression as cold and sharp as a diamond. "Don't kill him yet," she said softly. "A quick end is a mercy he doesn't deserve. Let me show you how to take back your money and his dignity, piece by piece." Jae-Min watched her, a genuine spark of interest lighting his eyes. He had wanted a debtor, but he had found a partner. "Tell me your plans, Soo-Jin. If it's as ruthless as you look, I might just let you lead the hunt." The transformation didn't start with a dress. It started with the silence of Kang Jae-Min's private atelier. For years, Soo-Jin had dressed to blend into the background of Dong-Hyun's ambitions, wearing muted beiges and conservative cuts that signaled supportive wife. She had been a ghost in her own home. Now, standing before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, she watched as Jae-Min's personal stylists stripped away the last vestiges of that fading life. Jae-Min stood by the window, his reflection sharp and immovable. "A man like Dong-Hyun plays on your guilt," he said, his voice a low, rhythmic tether to reality. "He needs you to feel small, so he can feel significant. But in my world, insignificance is a death sentence." He signaled to an assistant, who brought forward a garment that seemed to pulse with its own heat. It was a gown of deep, unapologetic crimson, the color of power, of warning, of blood. As Soo-Jin stepped into the silk, the fabric felt like armor. It didn't just fit her body, it demanded she stand taller. The plunging neckline and structured shoulders replaced her housewife softness with a lethal elegance. When the light-colored fur coat was draped over her shoulders, the contrast was startling. She looked like a woman who didn't just own the room, but the entire building. "Look at yourself, Soo-Jin," Jae-Min commanded, stepping closer. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a heavy weight. The woman who cried in the rain is gone. She was a victim of her own loyalty. This woman? She is the price Dong-Hyun has to pay for his greed. Soo-Jin looked into the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Her hair was swept into a sharp, sophisticated style, and her eyes, once clouded with blind loyalty and confusion, were now cold and focused. The controlled panic Dong-Hyun had instilled in her had hardened into a quiet, dangerous resolve. She realized then that Jae-Min wasn't just giving her clothes or resources, he was giving her permission to be the predator. She thought of Dong-Hyun's sneer, his claims that she was too boring to leave, and his secret family living off her hard-earned dividends. A slow, sharp smirk touched her lips, the first true expression of her new self. "The bank accounts are ready?" she asked, her voice steady and devoid of the old tremors. "Everything is in place," Jae-Min replied, a hint of approval in his stern gaze. "The trap is set. All that's left is for you to walk into the light and watch him crumble." Soo-Jin adjusted the fur coat, the soft white contrast against the red dress, signaling a new dawn. She wasn't just leaving a marriage, she was inheriting an empire. The woman in the mirror was no longer a wife. She was the storm. The silence in the study was absolute as Soo-Jin pressed send on the final encrypted file. For years, she had balanced Dong-Hyun's books, smoothing over his clerical errors and shielding his offshore accounts with her own reputation. Now, those same spreadsheets were a roadmap to his destruction. With a single click, she funneled a decade of tax evasion and money laundering evidence directly into the hands of the Financial Crimes Division. "It's done," she whispered, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her cold, steady eyes. Across town, the second half of the sting was already in motion. Dong-Hyun sat in a dim VIP lounge, sweat beading on his forehead as he waited for his couriers. His illegal side ventures, the high-interest shadow banks, and the shipping routes he had hidden from Soo-Jin were suddenly failing. Every time his phone buzzed, it was another disaster. His warehouses were being raided, not by police, but by men who moved with the silent, terrifying precision of Kang Jae-Min's organization. Jae-Min's men didn't just take the cargo, they left behind a message that chilled Dong-Hyun to the bone. Your credit has expired. As the walls closed in, Dong-Hyun frantically dialed his secret family's home, seeking the comfort of the lie he had built. But Serena's voice was hysterical. Dong-Hyun, the accounts are frozen. The credit cards declined at the grocery store, and there are men in black suits parked outside the house. What did you do? Panic finally took root in his chest. He realized with a sickening jolt that he hadn't just lost his money, he had lost the power to protect his double life. Every luxury he had provided for Serena and the child was tied to the corporate empire Soo-Jin was currently dismantling piece by piece. Soo-Jin stood up from her desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights. She felt no regret. She had been the architect of his success, and she was well within her rights to be the architect of his ruin. Her blind loyalty had been a flame that kept him warm, but now that she had redirected that fire, it was turning his world to ash. The phone on her desk vibrated. It was a message from Jae-Min. The pressure is at the breaking point. He's running out of places to hide. Soo-Jin smoothed the fabric of her dress, a sharp, predatory smile touching her lips. Dong-Hyun had always told her she was too boring to leave him. Now, she was going to show him exactly how exciting it could be to watch an empire fall. The sting was complete. All that was left was to watch him crawl. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Soo-Jin's new penthouse, blurring the city lights into smears of cold neon. Inside, the air smelled of expensive sandalwood and power, a stark contrast to the life she had once shared with a ghost. She was swirling a glass of vintage red, the same shade as her dress, when a frantic pounding erupted at her door. When she opened it, she didn't see the man who had mocked her age or her loyalty. Instead, she found a broken animal. Park Dong-Hyun was unrecognizable. His bespoke suit was shredded and caked with dried mud, and his face was a map of purple bruises and jagged cuts. He collapsed onto his knees before he could even cross the threshold, his hands trembling as he reached for the hem of her fur coat. "Soo-Jin, please," he rasped, his voice cracking with a terror she had never seen in him. "You have to help me. They're going to kill me." Soo-Jin didn't flinch. She didn't even set down her glass. She simply looked down at him, her expression as polished and cold as marble. "You seem to have forgotten, Dong-Hyun. According to you, I'm just a boring, powerless woman. Why would a man of your stature need my help?" "I was wrong. I was a fool," he choked out a sob, blood trickling from a split lip onto her pristine floor. "The investors, they weren't just businessmen. I owed money to people who don't take excuses. They took the house, they took the cars. Serena took the rest and vanished the moment the accounts froze. She left me, Soo-Jin, but you were always the loyal one." He tried to grab her hand, but she stepped back, letting his fingers brush against the cold air. The irony was delicious. He had spent years building a secret life on her dime, and now that the dangerous people he had tried to impress were at his throat, he had crawled back to the only person who had ever truly protected him. "I was loyal to a husband, not a thief," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly, quiet calm. "And those dangerous people you're so afraid of? You should have checked who their boss was before you started skimming from their accounts." Dong-Hyun froze, his eyes widening as a heavy, rhythmic footstep echoed from the hallway behind her. Kang Jae-Min stepped into the light, adjusting his cufflinks with a terrifyingly serene composure. The blood drained from Dong-Hyun's face until he was as pale as a shroud. He looked from the Mafia Boss to his ex-wife, finally realizing that the woman he had discarded hadn't just moved on, she had ascended. "Please," Dong-Hyun whispered one last time, his voice barely audible over the rain. Soo-Jin took a slow sip of her wine, her gaze never wavering. "You told me I had nowhere to go, Dong-Hyun. It turns out, you were the one with no place left to hide." The crystal chandeliers of the grand emerald ballroom cast a jagged light over the elite of the city, but all eyes were fixed on the woman in the deep red dress. Soo-Jin glided through the crowd, her light-colored fur coat draped over her shoulders like armor. She wasn't the ghost of a betrayed wife anymore. She was the sun around which the room's power now orbited. Then, the air shifted. From the corner of the gala, a man stumbled forward, his presence a violent contrast to the elegance surrounding them. Park Dong-Hyun looked like a shell of the man he once was. His suit was rumpled, his face gaunt, and his eyes carried the frantic, bloodshot look of a man who had watched his entire world crumble in a matter of weeks. "Soo-Jin," he rasped, his voice cutting through the soft orchestral music. The guests went silent, their whispers dying in their throats. Dong-Hyun reached out with trembling hands, trying to grab her sleeve. "Soo-Jin, please, you have to listen to me. It's all gone. The house, the accounts. They've taken everything. Serena and the child, they left the moment the money ran out." Soo-Jin stopped, her expression as cold and unyielding as polished marble. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, seeing not the husband she had once adored, but a pathetic stranger. "I told you once, Dong-Hyun," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You didn't just lose a wife, you lost your protection." "I made a mistake," he sobbed, oblivious to the cameras now flashing around them. "I was blind, but we can start over. You're successful now, you're powerful, you can fix this. You're still my wife, Soo-Jin. We're family." "Family?" A deep, resonant voice vibrated through the hall, freezing the marrow in Dong-Hyun's bones. From the velvet shadows behind Soo-Jin, a tall, imposing figure stepped into the light. Kang Jae-Min moved with the silent grace of a predator. His black suit was sharp enough to draw blood, and his gaze held the terrifying weight of absolute authority. Without a word, he placed a steady, protective hand on Soo-Jin's shoulder. The heat from his palm felt like a seal of ownership and a death sentence for anyone who dared cross her. Dong-Hyun's face drained of what little color remained. He took a staggering step back, his mouth hanging open. He knew that face. Everyone in the underworld knew that face. "You, Kang Jae-Min? What is this?" "You're confused, Dong-Hyun," Jae-Min said, his eyes narrowing with a dark, mocking amusement. "You seem to think you still have a claim here, but Soo-Jin doesn't belong to a man who hides in the shadows of a secret life. She is under my personal care now. I am her benefactor, her partner, and the one who will ensure that you never step within a mile of her again." Jae-Min leaned in closer, his voice a lethal whisper that only Dong-Hyun could hear. "Everything you lost? I'm the one who took it, and I'm just getting started." Soo-Jin turned her head slightly, meeting Jae-Min's stern gaze with a subtle, triumphant smirk. She didn't need to say another word. As Jae-Min led her away, Dong-Hyun fell to his knees in the center of the ballroom, a broken man finally realizing that the woman he thought was a shadow had become the queen of his nightmare. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, broken only by the frantic, ragged breathing of Park Dong-Hyun. He looked small, his expensive suit rumpled as he knelt on the polished marble, the golden sunset light from the towering windows casting long, jagged shadows across his terrified face. Just moments ago, he had been the guest of honor. Now, he was a ghost watching his own funeral. Kang Jae-Min's hand remained possessively, yet respectfully, on Soo-Jin's shoulder. The heat of his palm through her fur coat was a grounding force against the cold desperation radiating from the man on the floor. Jae-Min didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone was a death sentence for Dong-Hyun's reputation. "Soo-Jin, please," Dong-Hyun gasped, reaching out a trembling hand that was instantly blocked by one of Jae-Min's silent, stone-faced men. "I did it for us, the business, the family. I was trying to build something." "You built a house of cards on my foundation, Dong-Hyun," Soo-Jin said, her voice like sharpened glass. She looked down at him, and for the first time in 15 years, she felt no urge to fix him. The blind loyalty that had once been her greatest weakness had finally burned away, leaving behind a cold, shimmering clarity. "You didn't just steal my money to feed your secret life. You stole the credit for my work. But as you can see, the empire belongs to the architect, not the tenant." With a flick of Jae-Min's fingers, his men stepped forward. The grace period was over. They gripped Dong-Hyun by the arms, hoisting him up. He began to wail, a sound of pure, unadulterated fear that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. He was dragged toward the heavy oak doors, his heels scuffing against the floor that Soo-Jin had paid for. The House of Park hadn't just fallen, It was being evicted. As the doors swung shut, cutting off Dong-Hyun's pleas, a heavy weight lifted from Soo-Jin's chest. The ballroom guests began to whisper, but she didn't hear them. She turned slightly, meeting Jae-Min's gaze. His expression was stern, controlled, but there was an unmistakable glint of pride in his dark eyes. He didn't look at her as a prize to be won or a victim to be shielded, but as a peer, a woman who had walked through the fire and learned how to command the flames. "It's over," Jae-Min said softly, his voice a low vibration. "No," Soo-Jin replied, adjusting her red dress and looking toward the horizon. "It's finally beginning." She realized then that losing a liar wasn't a tragedy, it was a purification. She had lost a husband who saw her as a tool, but she had gained a kingdom and a man who knew exactly how to respect a queen. Standing tall, flanked by power and draped in her own success, Han Soo-Jin walked away from the wreckage of her past and into the dark, glittering promise of her future. "In the end, I learned that a man's heart doesn't stray because you didn't give enough. It strays because he didn't value what he had. I didn't just find someone better, I became someone better. I chose my dignity over a lie, and my daughter's peace over a toxic father." If this story reminded you of your own worth, please like, share, and comment your thoughts below, and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We like to know how far our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of strength and transformation.